This is session 6 in our series on the cross of Jesus Christ. And in this session, I want to talk about the identificational nature of the cross. You've got to stay with me for this whole session. It's so critical. Jesus has invited us to do the cross with him. That's what I mean by the word identificational. We identify with his cross. He said, take up your cross and follow me. Lovers want to do everything together. I'm so grateful for the ways that he suffered so I don't have to. But now in appreciation, there's something inside of me that goes, you know what? I don't want you just suffering all by yourself. I want to do some of this with you. And because of love, we want to enter into the thing with him and participate and fill up in our flesh what is lacking regarding his sufferings. When people suffer together, it produces an uncommon bond of affection and loyalty and allegiance. This is a common plot in many movies. I saw a movie once called The Way Back from 2010. It was a 2010 movie. The Way Back. Prisoners that were in a prison together and they got this uncommon bond. This is true in movies like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, or The Shawshank Redemption. There's all kinds of movies out there where people in prison shared prison together, and because of the intense suffering of prison, it produced a brotherhood that becomes a central pillar in the plot of the movie. Because when you suffer together, something cohesive happens that brings you together in a very strong way. Let me use another example of this. I would like to use the example of my marriage. I've been married to Marcy for 39 years, and my voice took the hit 28 years ago. And so for the greater part of our marriage, she has walked with me in what I call a crucible, this fiery trial connected with my voice. And there is nobody on the planet that has walked with me in this trial as intimately as my wife has. I'm telling you, there is nobody to replace her. Irreplaceable in my life because of what we have endured together. And this happens between the Lord Jesus and his bride. When his bride shares a cup of suffering with him, it produces a camaraderie and identification, something the angels don't have, something the cherubim don't have, even those fiery seraphim don't have this. All the other creatures around the throne are looking at this thing that we have with Jesus because we share in his sufferings. Unrivaled intimacy. Shared sufferings and shared victories. The Church of Jesus Christ has suffered for the gospel from the start, from the book of Acts right up to the present hour. We have suffered for the gospel with Jesus. In fact, if you dig up the records from way back in the ancient times when the church was young, when they would ordain people to the ministry, this was what they would say. They would say, and I'm going to read it now. Art thou then able to drink of the cup which I am about to drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am about to be baptized? And the ordinand, the person being ordained, would then answer like this: I take on myself scourgings, imprisonment, tortures, reproaches, crosses, blows, tribulation, and all the temptations of the world, which our Lord and Intercessor and the Universal Apostolic Holy Church took upon themselves. This is our heritage, my friends. We have centuries of heritage of suffering with Christ for our faith. I think it was John Wesley that said, be ready to pray, be ready to preach, and be ready to die. This is our heritage in our faith. Now, I have a suggestion for you. We're on the cross. We're talking about the cross in this series. When you're meditating in a verse, put that verse over the cross and ask yourself, what does this verse speak to me when I see it emblazoned over the cross? Here's a verse that I want to put over the cross right now. It's Hebrews 1 verse 5. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And when you're looking at the cross, you're looking at the Father fathering Jesus. And you're looking at Jesus being a son to his Father. So if you want to know how the Father fathers, look at the cross. This is how he does it. He takes you through a great death so that he can lift you up in a fantastic resurrection. Everyone is going to stare at you. They're all going to speculate. They're all going to wonder what you did wrong. They're all going to wonder, what did you do to bring this on yourself? But it's how he fathers us so that he can raise us up and crown us with glory and honor. He fathered Jesus this way. He's going to father you this way. This is our Heavenly Father. When you're looking at the cross, you're looking at how he fathers his children. Now, some people are cynical about this. They look at that and go, this is your Father. They're like, are you telling me that the Father crucified Jesus and this is how he fathers? If this is how God fathers his children, they call it cosmic child abuse. I'm quoting them now. That's not my term for it. That's how they speak of the sufferings of the cross. Cosmic child abuse. And it's a cynical way to look at the cross. But I will say this. If the cross had been Jesus' last chapter, it would have been cosmic child abuse. But the cross is never intended to be your last chapter. Just as surely as he has a great cross for you, just that surely he has a great resurrection for you. And the Father was exonerated in his fatherhood because he raised Jesus up. And yes, he crucifies, but he also resurrects. This is who our Father is. Peter wrote, 1 Peter 4:13, rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, so that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. And Peter uses this interesting phrase, to the extent. He says, to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings. In other words, when you're in a trial, you are suffering to an extent, not 100%. Nobody suffers the cross at 100% participation. Nobody can handle it. We, all of us, when we share in his sufferings, suffer to an extent, to a percentage. There's a percentage in your trial that you're partaking of Christ's sufferings. 3%, 5%, 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever the percentage is, to whatever percent, to whatever extent that you share in Christ's sufferings, rejoice, because you will also share in his joy. With my trial, I have had a very large question with the Lord. I've asked this question for many years, Lord. Is this trial a participation? I'm speaking of my vocal infirmity, the pain I have. Is this trial a participation with you in your sufferings? I think I found the answer in 1 Peter just a few verses later. This is now 1 Peter 4, verse 19. Peter writes, "Therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to him in doing good, as to a faithful Creator." You are sharing in his sufferings to the extent that you are suffering in the will of God. If there is a percentage of your suffering that is according to God's will, then to that degree, to that percentage, I think it can be said that you are partaking of Christ's sufferings. You are identifying with him in the sufferings of the cross. I learned to love by looking at the cross. Here's how you do it. You take it in your hands. You take it in your feet. You take it on your brow. You drink the reproach of people. You wrestle with demons, principalities, and powers. You endure the forsakenness of God. You impoverish yourself to enrich others. You give yourself away without regard to self-preservation. You stand on the nail to the end, and you give him your love just like Jesus. This is how we love. Jesus created the human body for crucifixion. At the creation, Jesus is fashioning a body for Adam. And he knows, as he's creating this body for Adam, he knows he himself will one day inhabit just such a body. So he's creating a body he himself will live in for eternity. And I can almost imagine, now this is a hypothetical conversation, not in the Bible, but I can imagine at creation, the Father going to the Son and going, "Son, are you sure you want to put all those nerve endings in the hands like that? My goodness, that's where they're going to put the nail, son. Son, are you sure you want to put all those nerve endings in the feet like that? That's where they're going to put the nail." And I imagine the Son at creation going, "Yes, Abba, I know. I want to feel their agonies at the center of my being." Nobody has suffered like God. Nobody can look at the cross and go, "Oh God, You don't understand my world. You don't get my pain. You can't connect with my situation. Nobody can say that because nobody has gone as low into suffering as God has. Nobody has suffered like Jesus. Do you want to know how Jesus feels about you? He feels about you in his scalp, in his cheek, in his neck, in his shoulders, in his arms, in his hands, in his legs, in his chest, in his back, in his feet. He feels about you all over. And this is how I want to feel about you, Jesus. I want my love for you to be something I feel in my scalp, in my cheeks, in my neck, in my shoulders, in my chest, in my arms, in my hands, in my back, in my legs, in my feet. I want to feel about you, Jesus, all the way through my being, just like you. I want to love like you love. I want to share in your passion. I want to identify with your cross. A psalm that has meant a lot to me in my suffering is Psalm 74. And I see in this psalm a connectivity to identifying with the cross of Jesus Christ. Psalm 74, it's a lament. It's one of those psalms that you've probably never heard anybody preach from. I promise you, nobody will preach from Psalm 74 on Sunday morning TV. It's just not one of those kind of messages that you use to grow a following, if you know what I'm saying. Psalm 74, it's a lament. There's just a lot of pain in the psalm because it's a time of desolation in Jerusalem. Babylon has come through. They have razed the city to the ground. They've burned the temple. They've taken away God's people captive back to Babylon. And Jerusalem is in this this season of grief and mourning as a city. And so Psalm 74 is entering in to the sufferings of Jerusalem. And it says in verse 1, we're cast off. Verse 3 speaks of perpetual desolations. Verse 5, we're hewn down as men hew down trees with an axe. Verse 7, the sanctuary is burned to the ground. Verse 9, there's no sign of anything changing or improving, and no prophet knows how long this thing is going to go on. We're under reproach. Verse 10, incredible suffering in the psalm. And now we come to verse 19. I read Psalm 74:19. Oh, do not deliver the life of your turtle dove to the wild beast. In the midst of horrific suffering, the psalmist goes, we're your turtle dove. I'm your turtle dove. And it's a metaphor of affection, of this fantastic intimacy and love. I'm your turtle dove. Why am I hurting so much when I know that I'm this dear to you? You died on the cross for me. I know you love me, but I'm in so much pain right now, Lord. I don't know how to understand. I'm hewn down. I'm desolate. I feel like they've been just taken at me. I've been chopped down like with an axe. And yet something is telling me in the midst of my trial, I'm your turtle dove. And it's fascinating to me that in the context of a psalm speaking of incredible pain and suffering, that we have this revelation of this intimacy that we enjoy with Jesus. We're his turtle dove. And the amazing thing is that in the place of suffering, there is this remarkable intimacy. You're in pain. You're being pressed. You feel like there are perpetual actual desolations all around you. And yet this is pressing you into God with desperation. You have a hunger and a thirst for God in your trial such as you've never had. And this pursuit of God is producing a blessing in your life. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness. You're gonna be filled. And you're pursuing God in your pain. And through this, look what's happening to you in your trial as you identify with the cross of Christ, pressing into God in your trial. Your prayer life is becoming stronger. You're finding new intimacy with Jesus, such as you've never known before. You're gaining a deeper understanding into His Word. He's transforming you all the way through. You are now a partaker of His holiness. Hebrews 12, verse 10. You're gaining a greater compassion for others that suffer. You're hearing His voice in ways you've never before. There's coming a new authority on your life. Beloved, God is using your trial. Oh, turtle dove, He is using your trial to change you and to bring you into His image. Suffering has opened the door to unprecedented intimacy with your turtle dove. In fact, I'm going to be bold about it and just say there are realms of intimacy you cannot experience apart from suffering. God, why am I in so much pain? I'm in this fetal position. I'm in so much pain. If you love me so much, why am I hurting so much? And when you're in your darkest pain and you don't understand what's happening and you're saying, God, why these desolations? You hear this tiny voice. He goes, you're my turtle dove. And somehow, in the midst of your strongest calamity, He is whispering His affections to you and telling you how precious you are to Him. Turtle doves, they're beautiful birds. I dare say, I think they're one of the most beautiful birds. They've got these silvery feathers. They've got these dark, gorgeous eyes. They feed on grass seeds. They pair for life. They mate for life. They're lovebirds. And if you ever see turtle doves, and by the way, they're in most every nation of the earth, if you ever see turtle doves, see one, you're probably going to see another. They do everything together. So if you see a turtle dove that's by itself, it's probably lost its mate. Turtle doves are always found in pairs when they're living in together. They're inseparable. I've got a turtle dove story. I'm going to tell you my turtle dove story. I was 29 at the time of my story, and I just want you to know that because I was a punk back in my 20s. I'm going to tell a story on myself. Back in my 20s, I've got a policy. I don't swear for animals because I was coached on this by my dad. He's like, you know what? There's been too many stories of people, they swerved to miss the dog, lost control of the car, and then they hit the people, and people have lost lives because somebody was swerving to miss a deer or to miss a dog or a cat or some kind of creature in the road. And so I just decided right from the start, I'm not swerving for animals. I swerve for people, but not animals. So with that understanding, I'm driving down the road one day and I look ahead. I'm doing about 50 miles an hour and I look ahead and I see two turtle doves and they are waddling out into the road. And I'm talking to them because I'm a distance away yet, but I'm talking to them. You better turn around and get out of the road because I don't swerve. But they just kept on coming into the road, and they're searching for seeds that are scattered, grass seeds scattered in the road. And as they're making their way into the road, I'm like, you better move. I hit them at 50 miles an hour. My car, I went thwap. I looked in my rearview mirror. Feathers everywhere. And when I drove away from the scene, I'm thinking to myself, stupid birds, they should have moved. It was later that I learned something about turtle doves. They kind of have tunnel vision. They get focused on what's in front of them, and they lose their peripheral sense of what's going around them because they're focused on what they're eating, and they're focused on one another. The lovebirds were so distracted with one another, they didn't even see me coming. And before it was too late, I had killed them both. And the Lord says to us, you're my turtle dove. You have dove's eyes. That's what he says in the Song of Solomon. He calls us his dove. We are his turtle dove, even in the place of suffering. And now Jesus says to you in your pain, he says, you're my turtle dove. You're my only one. You're my favorite. You've ravished my heart. You're my beloved. And we think, oh, I must be abandoned. I must be rejected. I must be forsaken of God because my pain levels are so intense. And he's going, actually quite the opposite. You're my chosen. I have a purpose for this cross. I've chosen you for this. I love you. I'm doing something in your life. Let's do all of life together. Let's do meals together. Let's do mornings together, afternoons together, evenings together. Let's do people together. Let's do nations together. Let's do the harvest together. And he wants to be our turtle dove that is at our side, always doing all of life together. You two turtle doves, you're lovebirds, you and Jesus. You do the cross together. You do the Father's will together. I'll be honest with you, my friends, I did not really connect that much with what I'm speaking of right now. I did not connect with the cross being something that I should share with him. I didn't really connect with suffering. So if somebody were to speak in this manner like I am, I probably would just disconnect from the YouTube clip and be finished with it because it just didn't mean anything to me. I had a total disconnect until I suffered myself. And when this happened to me, in my voice, it catapulted me into suffering such as I had just never experienced before. And suddenly, the cross became meaningful to me. I'll tell you a secret. When I was baptized in suffering, I went to 4 places. I went to the Psalms. I went to Lamentations 3. I went to the book of Job. And I went to the cross. Where would I be today without the cross of Jesus Christ? Oh my goodness. I'm a survivor because of the cross. And now I connect viscerally with suffering. And his cross is so meaningful to my life. The greatest honor in David's life was not that he wrote many of our Psalms. The greatest honor in David's life was not that he was king of Israel or that he was given an everlasting throne. The greatest honor in David's life was being quoted 3 times on the cross. My you forsaken me? I thirst. Into your hands I commit my spirit. And when Jesus Christ was in the throes of his agony, and when he was looking for vocabulary to express the angst of his heart, he went back to David. He goes, David wrote it the way I feel it right now. And when Jesus was in the place of ultimate suffering, he quoted David. I want to ask David a question. David, what kind of a cup are you going to have to drink in order to write the kind of thing Jesus would want to quote on his cross? I think David must have been mystified by his cup, because he's drinking a cup of suffering. He just can't figure it out. And in a prophetic spirit, he prophesies. But I think he's like, Lord, why are my pain levels so intense? I mean, I'm writing this stuff. Why am I even writing like this? Because my pain is so intense, and I'm feeling now prophetically the sufferings of the Messiah. He is writing stuff, and he's going, why is my pain so intense? And today, David has his answer. When Jesus quoted him on the cross, it all came into perspective. And David goes, oh my goodness, that's why I had those experiences. That's why they were against me. That's why they hounded me and tried to take me out and tried to kill me. That's why I had so many enemies. That's why my cup was so severe. God was wanting me to write something that Jesus could quote on the cross. He couldn't understand his pain threshold, but now he has a brotherhood with Jesus Christ. Who else on the planet can say, he quoted me 3 times on the cross? When we get to the marriage supper of the Lamb, and we're all seated at the table, and we're having table chit-chat, there's only one man at the marriage supper of the Lamb that will be able to say at the table, he quoted me 3 times on the cross. I'm talking about intimacy, solidarity, fellowship, the fellowship that David has with Jesus because he suffered. My friends, I'm speaking about the identificational nature of the cross. This is what it's about, sharing in his sufferings for the sake of affection and love and solidarity. Suffering matures us. And Jesus wants a mature bride. He matures his bride through the cross, through the sufferings of the cross. Because he wants to get married to a bride that shares his maturity level, that shares his values, that shares his thinking. He wants her to have his same DNA, and he wants a soulmate. He wants someone that connects with him. When we get to the marriage supper of the Lamb and it's time for our honeymoon, I don't think he wants to marry a brat who brings Barbie dolls to the honeymoon, who sucks her thumb. I don't think he wants this kind of a conversation with his wife. I don't think he wants her going, Jesus, this is our honeymoon. Let's not talk about the cross right now. I never really did connect with that part of the thing, all the suffering and the pain and the horror, the torment, that whole side of it. I never really connected with that whole thing. It just was kind of morbid and gruesome to me, to be honest with you. So I just never did get that part of it. And now that it's our honeymoon, can we have a happy moment for once? And can we celebrate this moment together, have some joy, and not get off on the cross thing? I don't think that's going to be the conversation. I think the conversation will sound more like this. He will say to her, "Let me tell you about the Father's will for my life." And she will say, "Yes, and I want to tell you about the Father's will for my life." And he will say to her, "I want to tell you about the bitter cup that the Father gave me to drink." And she will say to him, "I also would like to share with you about the bitter cup the Father gave me to drink." And he'll say, "Everything was against me." And she'll go, "Everything was against me too." And he'll say, "I went into that battleground and I came away with scars." And she'll go, "You know what? I went to warfare and I came through with scars too." Because now she bears in her body the marks of the Lord Jesus. And one day he'll go, "Here's my scars." My friends, one day this very hand, is going to reach forth, and I will caress the scars that brought me the love of God in his hands, in his feet, in his side. And then he will reach forth his hand, and he will caress her scars, because she too carries the scars, the marks of Christ in her body. And he dignifies our scars, so they become tokens of our identification with his cross. They become emblems, badges of honor, and emblems of our marriage bed. Would you even want to show up at the marriage supper of the Lamb with no scars? Amy Carmichael is a sister in the Lord that she lived before our current time. She was a woman that suffered. She had a severe case of neuralgia in her body, and it would sometimes lay her up for a week at a time. She'd be bedridden. She was a missionary, and she served the Lord through through pain. And when you serve Jesus in pain, it sensitizes you to certain things. So you write things, kind of like David, you write things you would not have written before until you suffer. So I'm going to read a poem from Amy Carmichael, and I think you'll be able to tell from this poem that she has suffered because of what she writes. Hast thou no scar? No hidden scar on foot or side or hand? I hear thee sung as mighty in the land. I hear them hail thy bright ascendant star. Hast thou no scar? Second verse. Hast thou no wound? Yet I was wounded by the archers, spent, leaned me against a tree to die, and rent. By ravening beasts that encompassed me, I swooned. Hast thou no wound? No wound, no scar, yet as the master shall the servant be, and pierced are the feet that follow me, but thine are whole. Can he have followed far who has no wound, no scar? Amy Carmichael is writing about the identificational nature of the cross. Some of our best poetry comes from the place of suffering. Some of our best songs come from the place of suffering. When you read the stories of songs, almost every good song you read the story about, they'll tell you the valley they went through, the struggle they were in, finances, relationships, health, whatever was going on. Something dark, dismal. They didn't know how they were going to come through. And in the darkness, they sang to the Lord. And some of our best songs come from the place of suffering. Deep calling unto deep. That's where David got his Psalms from. When you read the Psalms, you're reading of a guy who's excavating a song from the depths of his pain. It's pain that gives us good songs and good poetry. And then when you come to that season in David's life where it's really rather tranquil and everything seems to be kind of peaceful, I'm speaking of his time in Ziklag, we have no psalms ascribed to his season in Ziklag. It's a time of respite and rest. Our songs come from our suffering. Whenever I'm suffering, I just go back to the cross. Whenever I'm in pain, I go back to the cross. When I can't make sense of my journey, I just go back to the cross. When I don't know the way before me, I go back to the cross. Whenever I hear that ancient accusation, God's withholding from you, I just go back to the cross. Have you ever heard that one? It's actually one of Satan's favorite accusations. He'll say to you, God's withholding from you. This accusation, it's as old as the hills. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden when he said to Eve, God is withholding from you the fruit that would make you everything that you could be. Satan still uses that trick on us still today, and he'll try to tell us God's withholding from you. I hear it from him all the time. And here's how it comes to me. He'll say to me personally, Bob, God is withholding from you the healing of your voice that would make you everything that you could be. And whenever I hear that ancient accusation, I just go back to the cross, because the cross nails that accusation. When I come to the cross, I'm not looking at a God who's withholding from me. I'm looking at a God with a nail in this hand, a nail in this hand, a nail in his feet, who stands on the nail, spreads his arms, and says to me today, I give you all my heart. I love you with all my strength. I love you with all my life. I love you with all my soul. I love you with all my mind. I love you with my last breath. I love you with my last drop of blood. And when I'm looking at the cross, I'm not looking at a God who's withholding from me. I'm looking at a God who's giving me everything. He's giving me his best. He gave me his only Son, Jesus Christ. And when I'm looking at at the cross, I'm looking at a God who is withholding nothing from me, and I'm declaring it over YouTube to every listener today. My God withholds nothing from me. He's given me Jesus. He's given me his healing. He's given me his redemption. And yes, he will restrain himself sometimes. He'll restrain himself strategically. Don't confuse his restraining from his withholding. He might restrain himself for a while, but he withholds nothing from me. And if he has restrained my healing for a season, it's because he's got something greater for me than I even had for myself. So I've decided to let him write the story rather than me become the author of my story. Jesus, you be the author of my story. Finish it your way. And I declare he withholds nothing from you. Hold to his hand. Identify in the sufferings of Christ. You may experience a great death, but you will also experience a great resurrection. This is the identificational nature of the cross. Thank you for staying with me the whole way through. But please don't give up on this series on the cross. Come with me to the next one, part 7. We're going to be talking about the labor of the cross. Part 7, it's coming up. Find it on my YouTube channel. Let's do part 7 together.